47.5 million iPhones sold in the third quarter. That is, I believe, slightly lower than estimates. We've also got Bob O'Donnell with us in San Francisco, as well as Ben Bajarin joining us of Creative Strategies. He's just out with a new report on satisfaction around the Apple Watch. But Mike, I'll start with you. What's your take on these iPhone numbers?
Well, obviously the EPS number beat estimates, $1.84 versus $1.81. What's interesting with Apple is they traditionally beat on that EPS number. The average beat's like 16%, so this one is quite lower than that. So on that top or bottom line EPS number, it was a miss. Obviously, the iPhone sales were a little bit lower than expected too, so that's interesting.
Earnings per share did beat $1.85 per share. You know, again, like you mentioned, this is not atypical of Apple.
Right, yeah, usually their beat is much greater than this as far as EPS go. Another really interesting number is obviously the China sales of $13.23 billion. There obviously has been so much concern about the China economy and the big stock market plunge that we saw in China over the last month, and whether that would affect sales.
Apple shares right now falling 7% in after-hours trading. I want to bring in Julie Hyman, our senior markets correspondent. Julie, what is standing out to you here? Is this the iPhone number?
Okay, let me just run through all the numbers here. So we have the ensemble of everything, and we can kind of pick out what is the most interesting here. So first of all, the company's earnings per share coming in 4 cents above estimates. Not a surprise, right? Apple tends to beat estimates. It's that iPhone number, right? 47.5 million iPhones in the third quarter. The estimate was for 48.8 million phones. This is the core product, people. This is it. Apple depends so heavily on the iPhone. So if it has lower sales than had been estimated, that's probably a problem. On the other hand, the average selling price in the quarter for the iPhone was $659.91. Average selling price. The estimate there was for about $636 per phone. So you sort of have a little bit of a balance going on there, but still definitely something to note here. The iPad average selling price was below estimates, $415. The estimate about $426. I'm looking here at the Mac sales in the quarter, 4.8 million Macs sold in the third quarter. That matched estimates. So there you don't really have an issue. We are also getting at least one number that I see that is a forecast for the fourth quarter. It's one that's pretty much in line. Gross margin forecast for the fourth quarter, 38.5% to 39.5%. The estimate was for 39%, so right at the midpoint there. But, I mean, the number that really stands out to me has got to be that iPhone number. Again, 47.5 million iPhones in the third quarter, where 48.8 million were estimated.
And let's put this in perspective, because this is typically a slower quarter for iPhone sales. This is the quarter ahead of the fall quarter. We're expecting them to unveil some new iPhones in September. I do want to throw it out to Bob O'Donnell out in San Francisco. Bob, I'm also looking at a China number, $13.23 billion in Greater China sales. Of course, China has becoming a greater and greater portion of Apple's overall revenue. Does that number jive with what you were expecting, given the volatility that we've been seeing in China of late?
Well, that was the big concern. And so what we're seeing is a reflection of the fact that the China economic impact clearly did impact Apple. And I'm sure that had a bit of an impact on those iPhone numbers. And, you know, what we see from those high ASPs that we were just talking about is the fact that it's the iPhone 6 Plus, the really big screen, the most expensive device, that's clearly driving the sales. And that's a hugely popular phone in China and Asia overall. So what I'm seeing from this, and I agree that the iPhone number is the big question, is this is the beginning, I think, of some challenges for the smartphone market in general. Not just for Apple, but for lots of folks. We've seen that from other vendors as well. So I think that's the concern we have to watch for.
And one of the things that's been happening in China is, although the smartphone market is saturating, others are saying the replacement market is actually accelerating. I want to talk about the watch for a little bit. We didn't think we were going to get much detail about how the watch is selling, but now Apple is saying they've sold more watches in the first 9 weeks than the iPad's first 9 weeks. I want to bring in Ben Bajarin of Creative Strategies. Ben, you just put out a report about the watch today. Does this number mean much to you? In your report, you said that 97% of people who own the watch are satisfied with it.
Yeah, I think that's, again, it speaks to the high levels of customer satisfaction of Apple's products. And we were actually estimating that in this quarter they would sell more than the iPad at launch, which basically means that, you know, the current generation, first generation Apple Watch is now the largest seller for a first generation product for Apple. And I think, you know, our goal was to say, since we don't we're not going to get hard numbers around sales, which is to look and say, are current owners satisfied? And you know, the resounding answer was yes, they were.
Yet Apple shares still down in aftermarket trading. David, what do you see? What's your big takeaway right now?
You know, a little bit, $1 million here or there of a product that's selling at $200 million a year, to me, is not a sign of a major shift either way. You know, we've got the most dominant tech product in the world, still doing generally well. That's my general takeaway. The watch, to me, is probably still a relatively minor product in the industry and is not something that we're going to see as a major driver of Apple earnings in the near term.
And I got to tell you, from my personal experience, I like my watch, but I love my iPhone 6. Julie, I want to bring you back into this. You've been watching the headlines. What are you looking at? So
in terms of the watch, I just wanted to mention a couple of their comments here. Apparently, they're coming from an interview that we're doing with the CFO of the company, Luca Maestri. So he says that the company exceeded watch sales expectations in the past quarter. He also points out that more than 100% of the quote-unquote other revenue category, that the rise there was because of the watch. And he's speaking about this other category because we knew that Apple was going to lump in the watch revenue with its other sort of other category. Wasn't going to break it out. So I'm looking at this other category for the third quarter, and what I'm seeing here is what I believe $2.6 billion of revenue here, if I'm reading this correctly. So he's saying that more than 100% of that increase is coming from the watch. I also wanted to point out, as we look at the action in the shares in the after hours, the company for the fourth quarter is coming out with a revenue forecast. It's not at all unusual for Apple to sort of be cautious with its forecast, but it's saying fourth quarter revenue will be at most $51 billion. The estimate from analysts is for $51.1 billion. So very slightly below, but nonetheless, that also could be partially responsible for the decline that we're seeing in the shares.
Apple also saying it's going to start selling the watch in more locations, but you're the stocks editor, Mike. What's happening here?
Well, I'm wondering about the overall impact on the market. Obviously, Apple is the biggest company in the world, $750 billion market cap. I'm looking at the NASDAQ 100 ETF, which in after-hours trading is down about 0.9%. You know, those reactions aren't necessarily accurate this close to the release, but it's clearly, you know, a straight line down in that. The S&P 500, Apple accounts for about 4% of that. It's down. The Spider ETF is down about 0.3% in after-hours trading. So it looks like, you know, if these numbers keep going, it could be a pretty weak market tomorrow.
Bob, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the reports that have been coming out about the Apple car. There was a new report today out of the Wall Street Journal that Apple has now hired an executive from Chrysler, that they're working on some sort of electric car project. How optimistic are you about what Apple's working on right now? And does it matter, or is it still all about the iPhone?
Well, I think the car is a very interesting development, but let's be honest, this is a 4 or 5 years away kind of factor. So, but it takes that long to start to develop a product like a car. So they're putting the pieces in place to explore this very seriously. And, they're going to do a lot of iterations on it. There's going to be a lot of talk about this as they hire people in and they do maybe prototypes or at least component elements of it. I mean, they could partner with another car vendor, maybe perhaps for the engines, and they do another piece themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities out there, but I think it's much longer term. I think in the near term, it is going to be about the iPhone, and that's what we have to watch, and then to see what happens with, the watch. But again, the watch, it's psychologically important, but financially, it's a, means nothing, really.
Apple shares still down more than 7%. Again, as you said, the iPhone still the most important driver of revenue for Apple. And Ben, I wonder to you, if the watch is still a niche product, is Apple over-dependent on the iPhone?
Well, I think, again, they've got a wide product category, but it is all about the iPhone. And I think the growth that we see in China, and for all categories, including the watch in general. But the goal, I think, over time will, again, to be high diversity across the categories. But, yeah, I mean, I think the point is, this is the first quarter where we've got some stories for the watch. Sales will now be sort of dissected from the other category as we can do reverse engineering. But this is a quarter over quarter over quarter story for the other category to see, for us to have a number of quarters to see, is it growing, is it shrinking, what's really happened. But yeah, I mean, revenue-wise, it's still clearly not the biggest driver out there, and it's going to be a small chunk of that going forward. So it's still largely about the iPhone. That's where a lot of their growth story is going to come from.
David.
This is a company that's under a microscope at all times because it is the biggest company, the biggest holding. Everybody loves
Generates
it.
the most
We all
profits
use
of any
it.
company in the world.
Every investor of note basically uses the product. So they said, under 49 million of iPhone sales could suggest slowing momentum. I still think, you got to look at the big picture. This company is beautifully positioned for the long term. There may be a short-term blip here in terms of what expectations and reality, how they fit together. But in reality, there's nothing to worry about Apple based on anything we've learned just now.
Shares still down 7% in after hours. Of course, this iPhone number is what everybody is going to be looking at.
Could be a buying opportunity.
Slightly below, though they did give a clue about the Apple Watch selling more watches in the first 9 weeks than they sold of the iPad. Okay, we're going